So off screen in Blender, I've gone ahead and imported all of the environment pieces to FBX files and imported them into Unity. And you can see them listed here in the meshes folder in the project panel. So we have from left to right, we have the corner section, which is an inward turn. We have the outward corner section for outward turns. We have a crate prop that you can see here. We have a floor piece, and we have a second floor piece, and 3 straight sections, slightly different from one another. We have a tank prop here, and 2 trim pieces that could be aligned to the bottom of the floor to create a kind of nice finish for games that are isometric and we don't want to see the backs of walls. I'm not going to be using these 2 pieces in this course, however, but they are there if you wish to use them. Now, of course, to create a level from these pieces, we could just start dragging and dropping pieces into the scene. For example, I could drag and drop this floor piece here and then a wall section for the edge piece, and we can align them using Vertex Snapping. Let me just quickly show you how that works. I'm going to maximize this viewport by pressing the space bar, and I will, for example, select this wall piece and I want to align it to the floor here. To do that, make sure the translate tool is selected here, and I'm going to press and hold the V key on the keyboard to enable Vertex Snapping. And I'm going to select this corner vertex on the floor and just click and drag to align that to this floor piece. So now these are aligned quite nicely together. And in this way, using Vertex Snapping, you can build up a completely seamless level. However, we can also use prefabs to make our work easier. So I'm going to delete both of these pieces, and let me show you how we will work with prefabs. Now, I know that, for example, our level is going to need a dead end section. We might have a corridor section, and at the end of the corridor we'll have a dead end. Now I'm going to create that dead end using 2 of these corner pieces. So I'm going to drag and drop this corner piece over here, for example, like so. And I'm just going to align that to the world origin, for example. So there it is, looking pretty good. And I'm going to duplicate this piece by pressing Ctrl D on the keyboard and invert the scale to -1. And there we have these 2 pieces aligned together, and well, that's looking fine. That creates a dead end section. Next, I'm going to create a new game object by choosing Game Object Create Empty, and I'm going to set the position of this to the world origin as well and name this game object Dead End. And then I'll move out here to the Assets folder. Before I do that, actually, I'm going to select both these corner pieces and make them children of the dead end section so that we group them under the dead end section like so. And then I'll create a new folder to contain our prefabs by right-clicking, choosing Create and choosing Folder, and I'll name this Prefabs, like so, and press Enter on the keyboard. Let's open up the Prefabs folder and create a new prefab by right-clicking here, choosing Create, and I'm going to select Prefab. And I'll name this prefab Dead End, like so. I'm going to select this dead end piece here and drag and drop it into the prefab. And when I select the prefab, you'll see in the preview panel that really we don't get a good view of our mesh here. But when we drag and drop that into the scene, it's going to look fine. So I'm just going to select this dead end piece, delete it from the scene. And now we have this dead end prefab. And every time I drag and drop this into the level, we get instances of this dead end section, and we don't need to arrange these 2 pieces every single time. So that's going to make our work a lot easier, and what I'm going to do next is really create some more prefab pieces like this to save us a lot of work. So now let's create some more prefabs that we're going to be able to use for our level. So I'm going to move over to the meshes group here, and I think what I'll do is I'll create a corridor section first. So let's drag in a straight piece here. And I'm going to align that once again to the world origin and just zoom in here. And I'm going to drag in maybe this section here and rotate that perhaps 180 degrees on the x-axis, on the y-axis, beg your pardon, and just align that to the origin. And so now we have a straight section with these 2 pieces aligned together, and that's looking okay. So I'm going to select this section and this section. Actually, we're going to parent these to a new game object. So I'm going to choose Game Object Create Empty. And again, I'm going to align that to the world origin and name this Straight Section 01. And select both of these pieces and just drag them, drop them into that straight section. Move over to the Prefabs group, right click, choose Create and select Prefab, and I'm just going to call this Straight Section 01 and just drag and drop that into this prefab, and now we have a straight section prefab. I might go ahead off screen and create more straight sections like that. That's looking pretty good. So I could just, for example, delete this, and every time now we wanted a straight section, I can just drag and drop that into the level. And the great thing about this is that we can still use vertex snapping. So I can hold down the V key, select that vertex and snap that straight section to here, and we've got a straight section that looks pretty good. Two of them aligned together, so that's fine. So I'm going to delete both of these for now because I want to create another prefab. The prefab I want to create this time, I think I'm going to create, maybe if we go back to meshes, I think I'm going to create one of these outward turn pieces. So I'm going to drag and drop this corner outward turn here and align this to the origin again. So we've got this outward turn piece, and I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Ctrl D on the keyboard, and I'm going to again apply negative scale to this so it goes to the other side, and we have these two sections here. I'm going to now just select another straight section piece, perhaps this piece, and rotate this 90 degrees on the x-axis, and I'm going to use vertex snapping to align this nicely with this piece here. Let's just drag in another piece over here, and again I'm going to use negative 90 degrees on the y-axis and use vertex snapping. So hold down the V key, click and drag it to here, and then we've created the outward turn into this section, but of course we need another straight section over here. So I'm going to click and drag this piece, rotate it 180 on the y-axis, and hold down the V key on the keyboard to vertex snap that in place. I'm going to add another one of these, again 180 degrees on the y-axis, and back to the trusted vertex snapping to snap that in place. And there, in doing that, we've created a complete outward turn that's going to be very useful. So again, we want to create the prefab, so I'm going to choose Game Object, Create Empty, align this again to the world origin, and I'm going to name this T section, and I'm going to put 01 at the end in case we want to create any more T sections. So I'm going to select this piece and all of these pieces except for the camera, of course, we don't want that in the prefab. Drag and drop it to T section like so. Again, move to the prefabs folder, right click, choose Create, select prefab, and I'm going to call this T section 01, and drag and drop that mesh into this prefab, and there now we have a T section prefab that we can drag and drop and use as many times as we want. So in that way, I'm going to go ahead off screen now and create some more prefabs that we can use to really put together a complete environment. So now it's time to build a level, and I just want to show you before getting started the different prefabs that I have available. So I have the dead end section that you've seen already, along with the straight section and the T section that I've created. But I've also created a floor section here and also a cross section for the cross section of the corridors. So let's get started at creating this level. I'm going to drag and drop a cross section instance into the level and position that at the world origin. So it's always good to start at the world origin and then build out from that. So we have that cross section here. I'm just going to fold that up in the hierarchy panel. And I think this is going to open outwards here into a larger room area. So for that I'm going to use the T section. I'm going to drag and drop the T section into the level. And again, it's completely hovering in mid-air, but that's okay because we can just vertex snap this into place. So I'll hold V on the keyboard and just drag and drop that down into position. So we've got that section here. And I think that towards this T section here, I'm going to align the floor piece that I have created. So let's just again hold down V on the keyboard and align the corner to that piece here. And I think that's looking pretty good. Yep, so we've got that floor section that opens out here. I think over here on these two ends, we're going to have a dead end section. So I'm going to drag and drop the dead end section here, and I'm just going to press spacebar on the keyboard to maximize this viewport. Let's just press E on the keyboard, hold down the Control key to snap the rotation to discrete increments. So I'm going to hold down Control and rotate in discrete increments to about there. Switch back to the Translate tool with the W key, hold down V on the keyboard for Vertex Snap and just snap that into place. Press F on the keyboard to frame it, and yep, that's looking fine. So that's situated in place. And again, a similar kind of thing we're going to do for this side. So I'm going to press Control D to duplicate that prefab, move it out, press E on the keyboard, discrete rotation for that piece. Again, switch to the Translate tool, W, hold down V and Vertex Snap that into place. So we have these two dead-end sections. Now I think over here for this main room piece, we're going to have to start resorting to the standard meshes we've imported and not the prefabs, trying to kind of finish to the edges here. So I'm going to just restore my viewport, switch over to the meshes folder, and begin really putting in these edge pieces. So we're going to have an edge piece here, and I'm going to just, I think, align this piece with the back wall here. So I'm going to hold down V on the keyboard. Let's just maximize this to get a bit of a clearer view. Hold down V on the keyboard and Vertex Snap that over to that side. I think I'll have another instance of this, so I'm going to press Control D and just bring this over to here, Vertex Snap that into place, and that's looking okay. Let's just bring in another wall section. So we're going to be using this wall section. So I'll drag and drop that into the scene, maximize my viewport, and again Vertex Snap that into place, and that's looking pretty good. Actually, I think I've Vertex Snapped this wrongly here. Yes, so I'm going to hold down V again, snap that vertex to there, and that's looking pretty good. Now of course we need to add some corner sections to this so that we can build a wall around this edge here. So find one of the corner sections. Here is a corner section, and again Vertex Snap that into place at the corner here. So put one there like so, and again duplicate this, press Control D on the keyboard. Going to bring that over to here. I'm going to use the negative scale on that just to put that in place. Hold down V and snap that into position. And on the basis of that, then I can bring a wall around to here, add another corner section here, and I think I'll do something similar and add a room over this side. So you've seen me sort of piece together all of these elements, and you don't need to see me add any more. It's really the same procedure for all the other pieces. So I'm going to add that off screen and complete our level, and resume recording when our level is completed. Now off screen I've gone ahead and completed the level, and I've saved the scene as scene 01, and we have something that looks a bit like this. And it's looking okay, but right now there's no lighting or any kind of variation in the lighting or illumination of the level. So what I want to do now is to create some lights. So to do this, I'm going to choose Create Object, Create Other, and I'm going to select Point Light, which is over here, Point Light. So I'm going to add a point light to the scene. You'll notice over here in the hierarchy panel that all the level has been arranged under the game object level. So if I expand that, you can see we've got quite a lot of meshes here. We don't really need to see all of that. So I'm just going to contract that again. Now I'm going to add the point light in the scene, and the way I'm going to do this really is just add a point light over here, let's say, about there. And I'm going to set the brightness perhaps a bit brighter than that. So increase the intensity just a little bit. And maybe the colour, I'm going to set this perhaps to a slight electrical sort of blue colour. Just get a bit of a tint there, and press Control D to create a new light, and maybe move a light over here. The brightness perhaps of this one I'll increase just a little bit, and I'll change the colour to a kind of reddish colour to give them an alarm sort of feel, maybe a sci-fi feel here. Again, perhaps I want to increase the intensity of the blue, maybe just a little bit more, like so, and maybe the intensity of this one just a little bit more as well. And I'm just going to maximize the viewport here so I can get a bit more screen space to work with. Now I'm going to select this light again and duplicate it, and this time I'm going to move it down to this side and create the red one, press Control D, and move it over to this side. So to around about there, and we've got some sort of nice illumination for this room. I'm going to select all 4 of these lights and press Control D and just bring them over here into this room really, which is going to be mirroring that light setup. So bring that sort of over into here, and that already is looking pretty good. So we've got a nice light setup here. I'm going to select this light and press Ctrl D and just bring it over here, maybe somewhere in this corridor section, maybe into the center. Press space. I'm going to just reduce the intensity of that light just a little bit here. Press Ctrl D again and bring a light over into that corner. Ctrl D and bring a light over into that corner. So we have a sort of basic light setup here. I might come in off screen, just tweak the brightness just a little bit. Now my intention here is to light map the level using single light maps, not dual light maps. So I'm going to use single light maps, which means that it doesn't matter how close our camera moves into the level, we're still going to be using the same light map. Unity will not swap out the light maps based on the distance of the camera. So to get started light mapping this, I'm going to come out of this view and select the level here. And I need to make sure that we enable the static checkbox here. So I'm going to enable that by putting a tick into the static checkbox. It asks me, do I want to apply these changes to all children? And yes, I do, because every single mesh in the level should be marked as static. Now, before we go ahead any further, I'm going to need to go to the Meshes tab and visit each of these meshes to generate light maps. That is, to generate light map UVs. So I can do this one at a time, but of course I can just select the first mesh and select the last one. So we select all these meshes together. You can see in the preview panel we've selected 11 meshes of 11 meshes. And I'm going to place a tick in the Generate Light Map UVs box and scroll down and click Apply. Unity will then go ahead and apply light mapping UVs to all of these objects so that when we calculate the light mapping, the shadows and highlights will fall on the geometry correctly. So I'm just going to accept all of those settings, and in the next video we're going to be focusing on building a light map for our level. So in this movie what I want to do is to bake a quick light map for our level, and this light map will mean that the lighting information will be embedded into the textures of our level, and it will save the computer from having to calculate lighting in real time, and that can give us quite a lot of performance benefits. So what I'm going to do here is just make sure I select the level object, and you can see that the static checkbox is enabled, and that also means that when I expand this level checkbox, expand the level group here, and I choose these other pieces, you can see that they are also marked as static. It's important that every single piece of our environment is marked as static, otherwise it will not be factored into the light maps. So having done that, having made sure that we have marked the static checkbox for all the pieces in our environment, we can then proceed to build a light map, and we do that by moving up here to the File menu and choosing Window and Light Mapping. And then with this here we get this light mapping dialog. I'm just going to click and drag and move that over here to the Object Inspector to dock that here into the interface to sort of make it a bit clearer for me to see. So we have this light mapping tab here, and we have all the settings that we can use to create our light maps. Now I'm going to be baking single light maps, and if I move over to the Bake tab, we can set that up here in the Mode setting. We have the choice of single light map, dual or directional. I'm going to be using single, which is perhaps the simplest kind, which means that it doesn't matter how far away the game camera moves, it doesn't matter how close even we move to the geometry in the level, the distance of the camera is completely irrelevant. The game will use only one set of light map textures to illuminate the environment. So I'm going to set single light maps here, and again I'm going to increase the bounce intensity, the intensity of the indirect illumination in the level. I'm not going to enable any ambient occlusion because using Blender we already baked the ambient occlusion into the level. And for the resolution, this is the number of pixels per world unit that will be associated with the light map texture. It's set to 15 here, often it's set to 50 by default. I'm going to set this perhaps to 20, and then finally I'm going to click the button that says Bake Scene. So when I do that, then Unity goes ahead and thinks about it, and you can see here in the status bar it's sort of calculating the light maps and baking in the texture. And in the preview panel here you can see the light maps for the environment. This is the final light map texture that will be blended onto the geometry in the level. you can see that it's created one light map and it's 2.7 megabytes in size, and the pixel dimensions are 1024 by 1024, and it took around 9 seconds for this to calculate, so that's pretty quick. And you'll notice that even if I select all the point lights in the scene using the hierarchy panel and I delete them, the illumination in the level just remains the same. So all of that lighting information is now calculated into the level and is not produced by any real-time lighting. I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo those deletions because I do want to keep the lights in the scene in case we need them at any later point. So I'm going to just completely get rid of the light mapping tab here, so close tab, and press spacebar to maximize the level. So now we have successfully light mapped our scene and it's looking pretty good. So let's move on. Now I think it's about time we took a tour of our environment in first person mode, and to do that is really simple. I have to import a first person controller. I can do that by choosing Assets, Import Package, and then by selecting Character Controller from the menu. Then this presents an Import Package dialog, and I can accept all of these defaults and just choose the Import button, and that will go ahead and insert all kinds of scripts and prefabs that I need to get first-person controllers working. In the standard assets folder, you'll see character controllers and first-person controller, and I can drag and drop that into the scene. I'm just going to position this first of all at the origin in the level, press F on the keyboard to frame the controller. I'm going to raise this up just a little bit so that we're above the floor just slightly. So this represents the first person control, the position of the player in the scene. I'm going to press play on the toolbar, and when I do that, oh, you can see the character controller just falls through the floor of the level. And the reason that happens is because there is no collision data associated with the meshes in the scene. Now, one way you can associate collision data with the meshes is by moving over to the meshes group, selecting all these meshes, and then enabling generate colliders and just choosing apply to generate those colliders. This will build collision information into the meshes based on the mesh data, but that really is not an optimal way to work because that involves a lot of complex collision data. It may give you some very accurate results, but better is to use standard box primitives to kind of approximate the collision data of the level. So let's see, for example, how I can make it so that we cannot fall through the floor. Well, I'm going to choose Game Object, Create Empty, and I'm going to call this, well actually I'm going to put this to the origin first of all, and I'm going to call this Floor Collision, like so. And to this floor collision object, I'm going to choose Component, Physics, and Box Collider, like so. I'm going to add a box collider to this floor, and you can see here in the viewport that we have this green wireframe view which represents the collision data for the box. I'm going to lower this down just a little bit to be in line so that the top of the box is roughly in line with the floor here. Now, this floor is the same level throughout the whole environment. It is the same vertical height throughout the environment. So I can then use these properties of size to increase the size of the box. So I'm going to stretch this out across the whole width of the level. So about something like there. And again in the Z dimension, I'm going to stretch this out even further. So now this box collider completely encompasses the environment and is level with the floor. So now if I press play on the toolbar, now the player doesn't fall through the floor. So that's looking pretty good. So now we're getting a more realistic result, and that is an optimal way to do things. But of course, I haven't assigned any kind of collider to the walls, which means that I can actually walk through the walls, and that's certainly not what I want to do at all. So the way that we go about fixing that is really repeating the procedure we've used here. We create another game object and use a box collider to sort of size out and approximate the walls. So that's something that I'm going to be doing off screen. You see me here apply this procedure to the floor, and really this is the same thing for all of the walls. So we need to add box colliders to all of these walls to sort of prevent the player from walking through them. And that is a much more optimal way to do it than using mesh colliders. So in this final movie, what I want to do is add some extra image effects and pizzazz to our level. And before I go ahead and do that, I just want to give you a quick tour of the hierarchy panel that you can see over here. Now I've organized all the lights in the level under the group lights here. So if I open up this game object light, you can see all of the point lights in this list. And under the level group, you can see all of the mesh pieces in the environment. And under the collisions group, you can see here we've got the floor collision that we created before, along with these wall objects that I've added, which contains the collision information for the walls. If I select this top level collision object, you can see drawn in the scene viewport here, all the green boxes around the walls. Let me just maximize that viewport. Actually, let me just go back and select collisions and then maximize the viewport. And you can see that I've drawn these collision boxes around all of the walls. And this really makes Unity treat the walls as solid objects. So now the player controller cannot walk through walls, and we can prove that quite easily just by pressing play on the toolbar and walking around the level. And you can see that the first person controller now, it really just cannot walk through the walls of the level, and that's just what we want. And that's a nice optimized workflow for creating collision data for your environments. So what I want to do now really is just add some extra flair. If I switch to the game tab, you can see I've added a black background to our camera. I did that really quite easily by just going to the first person controller, expanding this, choosing camera and setting the background color here. But I want to add maybe some bloom effect and a kind of fisheye effect to the camera, and we can do that using image effects. But I do want to warn the free users of Unity that the image effects package is available only in the professional version. You can add it to your project by choosing Assets, Import Package and Image Effects. I've added them already and they're under the standard Assets folder, Image Effects here, but we're not going to be accessing that folder. Instead, I'm going to be adding them as a component to the main camera under the first person controller. So to do that, I'm going to select the main camera here, and then I'm going to choose Component Image Effects, and I'm going to be adding a bloom effect here. So again, right now I've added the bloom effect, and I'll scroll down so we can see the properties for that. Let's just increase the intensity, and already in the viewport as I do that, make sure you're on the game tab. In the viewport you can see this taking effect, so I'm going to add some effect there just to add that, and maybe just sort of increase the threshold, decrease the threshold just a little bit. Now if I press play on the toolbar, let's just sort of see the effect that the bloom takes on there. So I think that gives us kind of nice highlight around a nice blur around the highlights of the level. So I'm going to accept that, and then I'm going to add the fisheye effect. So I'm going to choose Component, Image Effects, and Displacement, and then Fisheye. And already you can see the effect taking shape here, but I'm just going to tweak it just a little bit further, maybe just tweak it a bit further on the x-axis, and maybe a bit further on the Y, like that, to kind of create a distorted, dreamy effect. So now I'm going to press play on the toolbar, and this is looking much better. Actually, I'm just going to maximize this viewport, press play on the toolbar, let's get a full screen view of this sort of wandering around the level here. So everything's looking really here pretty good. We've added collision data, we've added light mapping, we've got our environment pieces, and it really is looking pretty good. So I hope you found this course very helpful. I've been Alan Thorne. Thank you for watching 3dmotive.com.